There are two kinds of fathers: the kind who teach their children what they know, and the kind who teach their children how to find what they need to know themselves. Ray Charles was, by most accounts from the people who knew him closely, the second kind. He was not a man who dispensed wisdom in the form of lessons or principles or structured guidance. He was a man who paid close attention and, occasionally, said exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, said it once, without elaboration, and trusted the person who received it to carry it forward in whatever direction it needed to go. His son Ray Charles Robinson Jr. was born in 1955, when Ray Charles was 24 years old, and in the middle of the creative explosion that was producing the recordings that would define soul music. The boy grew up in the specific circumstances of being a famous man's child, with the particular complications and silences and occasional overwhelming proximity that those circumstances produce. He grew up knowing that his father was extraordinary in ways the world recognized and celebrated. He also grew up knowing that his father was a man who was rarely fully present in the domestic spaces of a family life, who lived most completely in the recording studio and on the concert stage, who gave his fullest attention to the music in ways that left other things receiving whatever remained. This is not a story of grievance. Ray Charles Robinson Jr. has not told his father's story as one of grievance, and this narrative will not impose that frame on it. It is simply the reality of what it meant to be the child of a man whose gift consumed most of what he had to give. But there was an afternoon, one specific afternoon, in a recording studio in Los Angeles, when Ray Charles Jr. was still a boy, young enough that the memory has the quality of something foundational rather than something merely remembered. An afternoon when his father sat with him at a piano alone, with no session scheduled and no musicians present, and taught him a single thing. Not a song, not a technique, not a lesson in the formal sense of the word, something smaller than any of those things, and considerably larger. This is the story of that afternoon, of what Ray Charles gave his son in a room that no one else was in, and of what Ray Charles Jr. has done with it in the decades since, how it has lived in him, how it has shaped the way he has carried his father's name and his father's music through a world that has never stopped listening to both. Tu père onani, nodai kintio b real s son Ray Charles Robinson Jr. grew up understanding from a very early age that his father's name meant something in the world that it did not mean at home. At home, Ray Charles was simply his father, a man who was frequently away, on tour in the studio, traveling the circuit of performances and recording sessions that constituted the operational reality of his professional life. A man who, when present, was present in the specific way of someone whose attention was extraordinary when it was given, but was not always available to be given to the domestic details of family life. The music was always there, not intrusive. Ray Charles did not fill his home with his own recordings or speak constantly about the work, but present in the way that a river is present even when you are not looking at it. The piano in the house, the visitors who came and went with an urgency and a reverence that children notice without fully understanding, the phone calls that arrived at unusual hours, the conversations that stopped when Ray Charles entered a room, replaced by the specific quality of attention that famous people generate in the people around them, an attention that is also a kind of distance, a reminder that the person you are related to belongs in some fundamental way to everyone else as well. Ray Jr. was not shielded from any of this. He was not presented with a sanitized version of his father's life or protected from the reality of what his father's career required. He grew up in proximity to the full complexity of it, the professional brilliance, the personal absences, the specific way that a man whose gift requires most of what he has to give cannot always give what the people closest to him need. He has spoken about this in later years with the measured, considered tone of someone who has had a long time to find the right relationship to a complicated inheritance. He has not idealized his father, he has not diminished him. He has described, with careful honesty, what it was like to be the son of someone whose presence in the world was so much larger than any individual relationship could contain. But through all of that complexity, through the absences and the overwhelming public presence and the specific difficulties of growing up in the shadow of a name that belonged to the world before it belonged to you, there was the afternoon that Ray Charles Jr. has returned to in various forms and various contexts throughout his adult life. The afternoon that he describes when he describes it in the specific, economical way of someone handling something that has remained alive and needs to be treated with care. The afternoon his father taught him the only thing he ever directly taught him. Tu père tw. The recording studio was not an unfamiliar environment to Ray Charles Jr. He had been there before, brought occasionally by members of his father's team when Ray Charles wanted his son nearby, or simply because the practical logistics of a particular day had made the studio the place where father and son could be in the same room. But on this specific afternoon, a weekday, no session scheduled, the studio quiet in the specific way of professional spaces between uses. It was just the two of them. No engineers, no musicians, no members of the team managing the details of Ray Charles' professional life, just Ray Charles and his son in a room with a piano. Ray Jr. was young enough that the specific year is not something he has ever pinpointed publicly. Old enough to remember it completely, to carry it as a formed memory rather than a childhood impression. The estimate from context and from what he has said about the period places it somewhere in the mid-1960s, when Ray Jr. was between 8 and 12 years old. His father sat at the piano. He did not say anything at first. He simply played something that Ray Jr. did not recognize as one of his father's recorded songs, something that sounded like it was being created in real time, or like something so private it had never been given the form of a recording. Ray Jr. sat nearby, watching in the way children watch their parents do things that they do not yet fully understand, with attention that is more absorption than comprehension. After a few minutes, his father stopped playing. He turned on the bench toward his son, the characteristic movement, the body orienting toward a voice or a presence rather than toward a visual object. He asked Ray Jr. to come sit beside him at the piano. Ray Jr. sat down on the bench beside his father. The piano keys were in front of both of them. Ray Charles placed his son's right hand on the keys, not on a specific chord or a specific position, simply on the keys, his large hand over his son's smaller hand, both of them resting on the keyboard. Then he said, "Feel that." Ray Jr. felt it. The smooth surface of the keys, the slight give of them under the pressure of being touched without being pressed, the faint resistance of the instrument's mechanism beneath. He nodded. His father said, "No, play something." Ray Jr. pressed a few keys, uncertainly, with no particular intention behind the choice of notes. The sound that came out was childlike and without form, a few isolated tones that meant nothing musically. His father listened. When the small sound had faded, he said, "No, play what you heard before." Ray Jr. looked at his father, or oriented toward him, since his father could not see the look. He did not understand what was being asked. He had heard his father play something, but he could not reproduce it. He was a child, not a musician. He had not been trained to hold music in his memory and retrieve it through his hands. He said, I don't know how." His father was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing that Ray Charles Jr. has been carrying for the rest of his life. To pair THRE. You say it, you don't play what you know how to play, you play what you hear. 6 words of instruction. Or 7, depending on how you count. The kind of sentence that sounds simple and becomes more complex the longer you live with it. The kind of sentence that a child receives as a fact and an adult discovers is a philosophy. Ray Charles Jr. did not fully understand it that afternoon. He understood that his father was saying something important. The quality of his father's attention, the specific stillness with which he said it, communicated that clearly even to a child who could not parse the content completely. He held the sentence in the way children hold things they do not yet understand, not processing it, simply keeping it. The way you keep a stone you found by a river because something about it seemed worth carrying. In the years that followed, as Ray Jr. grew up and moved through the complicated experience of being Ray Charles's son in the world, navigating a name that carried enormous weight, finding his own relationship to his father's music, building a life that was genuinely his own while remaining permanently in proximity to a legacy that was also, in some fundamental sense, his. The sentence was always there. You don't play what you know how to play. You play what you hear. It was not strictly speaking about the piano. Ray Charles Jr. did not become a professional musician. He became, among other things, a person who has spoken publicly about his father's life and legacy with a care and an insight that reflects something deeper than biographical familiarity, a genuine understanding of what his father's music was doing and why it was able to do what it did. The sentence his father gave him was not a piano lesson. It was a description of how Ray Charles had been making music his entire life, not from technical knowledge, though his technical knowledge was vast, but from what he heard in the room, what he heard in his memory, what he heard in the specific emotional frequency that his mother, Aretha Robinson, had given him before he had the language to name it. You play what you hear. For Ray Charles, this meant you play the grief and the longing and the specific texture of what your life has felt like, and you let that be the music rather than using the music to cover it. You play what is actually present in you, regardless of whether it is what the session was scheduled to contain, or what the genre is supposed to sound like, or what anyone else in the room was expecting. For Ray Charles Jr., the sentence meant something adjacent but not identical. It meant you live what is actually present in you, regardless of what the world expects from the son of Ray Charles. You hear your own life, not your father's life, not the legend, not the enormous public presence that preceded you everywhere you went, your own. And you let that be what you play. He has done this. In the years since his father's death, in the way he has spoken about Ray Charles and about what it means to be Ray Charles's son, there is a quality of having genuinely heard his own experience, of not performing either grief or celebration, but simply telling the truth of what it was like from the inside, in the specific room where he actually lived rather than in the public version of that room. His father gave him that, in a studio on a quiet afternoon, with both their hands on the piano keys. To see what Ray Charles Robinson Jr. inherited from his father was not only a name and a connection to one of the most significant musical legacies of the 20th century. He inherited, more specifically and more usefully, a way of approaching experience. You don't play what you know how to play, you play what you hear. This is, when you unfold it completely, a radical instruction. It is an instruction to bypass the accumulated learning, the techniques, the conventions, the expectations that build up around any form of expertise, and go directly to the source, to what is actually present, to what is actually being heard, in this room, in this moment, by this specific person. Ray Charles had done this his entire career. He had heard gospel music and rhythm and blues occupying the same frequency and had played that, regardless of the fact that the conventions of the era said they were separate. He had heard country music and had recognized in it the same emotional register that ran through everything he had always played and had recorded it, regardless of the fact that no one expected a black R&B artist to be listening to that frequency. He had heard the specific sound his mother made moving through their house in Greenville and had played that in every recording he ever made, without ever being able to say directly that this was what he was doing. He played what he heard. And on one quiet afternoon in a Los Angeles recording studio, he sat beside his son and told him, "You do the same thing. Whatever your instrument is, whatever your life requires of you, don't play what you know how to play, play what you hear." Ray Charles Jeter has lived with this instruction for decades now. He has used it, not in the way his father used it, not through music in the formal sense, but in the way any instruction that is genuinely received is used as a frame, as a reference point, as the thing you return to when you are uncertain about what you are doing or why. It has served him. The people who have spoken to him about his father, journalists, documentary makers, people who loved Ray Charles's music and wanted to understand it more completely, consistently note that Ray Jr. speaks about his father differently from how famous people's children typically speak about their famous parents. There is no performance of grief or of pride. There is simply the quality of someone who has heard something clearly and is reporting it accurately. That quality came from the afternoon at the piano. It came from the 6 or 7 words his father said to him in a quiet room, with both their hands on the keys, on an ordinary weekday afternoon when no session was scheduled and no music was being made for anyone other than the two of them. 2 par 5e, Muhatte Romeo. Ray Charles is not alive to know what his son has done with the sentence. He died on June 10, 2004 in his home in Los Angeles at the age of 73. He did not live to see the conversations Ray Jr. has had in the years since. The careful, honest, genuinely illuminating conversations about what his father's music was and where it came from and what it cost and what it gave. Whether Ray Charles knew, when he sat beside his son that afternoon in the studio, what he was actually giving him, is impossible to say. It is possible that he knew exactly, that the instruction was deliberate, carefully chosen, the specific thing he most wanted to pass to his son out of everything he had accumulated in 35 years of making music. It is possible that he was simply doing what he always did, paying close attention to what was present and saying what needed to be said. In either case, the result was the same. A boy sat beside his father at a piano. His father placed the boy's hand on the keys. His father said 6 or 7 words. The boy held them without fully understanding them. And then the boy became a man, and the man spent the rest of his life finding out what the words meant, 1 year at a time, 1 conversation at a time, in one room after another that was not the room where the words had been given, but that carried the words into it regardless. You don't play what you know how to play. You play what you hear. Ray Charles heard more than anyone else in any room he ever occupied. He heard what was present and what was absent, and what was being said and what was being held back, and what the music needed that the musician was afraid to give it. He heard his mother in every song he ever recorded. He heard the shape of injustice in the acoustic signature of a segregated concert hall. He heard the emotional terrain of a country music song and recognized it as the same terrain he had always been crossing. He gave his son the instruction to hear. And Ray Charles Robinson Jr., in the years since his father's death, in the careful and honest way he has carried his father's legacy through the world, has been doing exactly that, playing what he hears. Ki epilogi. The afternoon at the piano was not documented. There is no recording of it, no photograph, no contemporaneous account written by anyone who was present. It exists only in Ray Charles Robinson Jr.'s memory, held there with the particular precision and care of someone who understands that what they are holding is irreplaceable. He has described it, in various forms and at various levels of detail in the years since his father's death. The descriptions are consistent, Not in the mechanical way of a rehearsed story, but in the organic way of a memory that has been returned to so many times it has found its permanent shape. The details that remain are the details that mattered. The details that have faded are the ones that were peripheral. What remains? The piano, the quiet studio, his father's hand over his hand on the keys, the instruction to play what he heard rather than what he knew how to play. The specific quality of his father's attention in that moment, completely present, directed entirely at his son, giving the afternoon everything that he gave the music in the moments that produced the recordings that have outlasted both of them. What Ray Charles gave his son that afternoon was not the music. He could not give his son the music. That was Ray Charles's specific gift, built from his specific losses and his specific navigation of a specific life, and it could not be transferred. What he gave his son was something more portable and more durable, a way of listening, a way of being present to what is actually there rather than to what is expected or assumed or conventionally available, a way of inhabiting your own experience rather than performing it for whoever is watching. This is, in the end, what the great teachers give. Not the content of their expertise, that belongs to them, is shaped by their specific life, cannot be simply handed over. But the method, the approach, the fundamental orientation toward experience that made the expertise possible in the first place. Ray Charles had built everything he had from listening, from the specific, total, completely undivided quality of attention he brought to every room he ever occupied. He had listened to his mother's footsteps in the kitchen and known where she was. He had listened to the acoustic signature of a concert hall and known how many people were in it and how they were seated. He had listened to the emotional frequency of a gospel song and heard in it the same frequency as a blues, the same reaching, the same human need to say something that language alone was insufficient to carry. He sat beside his son and told him that's how you do it. Hear everything, and play what you hear. Ray Charles could not see. He had spent 66 years hearing everything instead, and on one ordinary afternoon in a quiet studio, he gave his son the only instruction that mattered. Hear everything, play what you hear.